Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the last piece of the lecture for this week. Just wanted to talk about some paper topics with you. You know from the instructions that I sent out next week, you'll be preparing a draft of your essay, which you'll exchange with a colleague for peer review. You might want to review the guidelines for drafting that are laid out for you in the syllabus. There is some value associated to doing this process, totally aside from the fact that it makes your writing infinitely better. Anyway, just some 4 or 5 relatively unrelated things. First off, in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, you notice the names Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. All of those titles, except for Numbers, which is an English word, the other 4 titles are Greek words. And what that means is there's no possibility that those scrolls were originally called that, because the Hebrew Bible was not translated into Greek until around about 200 BCE, and that's obviously most likely when those titles were added. Not that that means a whole lot, but you can see already that material that predates the titles by quite a bit, which was obviously called something else, and then the Greek titles were added when the material was translated into Greek. We're not going to talk a lot about this translation, although it's interesting, and some of you might want to look at it on your own down the road for a future paper. Okay, so I really appreciated that some of you have gotten excited about comparing the creation stories, this one and some other ones, and some of you are interested in taking a look at a feminist critique of this material. Both of those are really interesting and exciting topics, and will give you lots of room to play in, and I will try to help with those as much as I can. Some of you are looking at picking some of the symbolism in this material and looking at that, and I made quite a study of that, so I can probably help with some of that. However, some of you may not want to go that large. Some of you may want to, in order to stick with a strictly literary paper, you may want to look at some of the smaller elements. So I'm going to list a handful of the things that are in there that are absolute evidence that a writer worked on this stuff, because the material is shaped by the hand and heart and mind of a writer, not just a sequence of events, which anybody can do, but the stories are shaped in certain ways, and that's absolute evidence that a writer worked on this. So let me start out. I'm looking at my list here. The first writerly element or literary element that I'm going to talk about today is hyperbole, 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 hyperbole. And hyperbole, as I think one of our colleagues suggested in the forum, is exaggeration for effect. Deliberate exaggeration of facts, deliberate inflation of information or data in order to create an effect. There's a lot of this stuff, and it would make a good paper. One of the ones that immediately comes to my mind is in this material, some of the forefathers are said to have lived for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, of course, you can ask, did so-and-so really live to be 999 years old? The answer is, for our purposes, we don't know. We weren't there, and neither was the person who wrote the story. So the only question we can ask and answer is, why does the writer use hyperbole there? Why does the writer write the story and say that these people live to be hundreds and hundreds of years old? Well, that's a question we can answer. That's deliberate exaggeration for effect, and it has to do with the idea that in mythology, the ancestors, the forebears, were always stronger, more powerful, more potent. They lived longer because they were closer to the wellspring of creation, and therefore they were more potent in interesting ways. Just writing down another thing here. Okay, so deliberate exaggeration for effect is evidence that a writer worked on this stuff. To take it literally, did so-and-so live to be 900 years old? Don't know, wasn't there, neither was the writer there. Can't answer that question. Why did the writer write it that way is a question that can absolutely be answered from a literary perspective. Another one is many of these stories have what is called a narrative arc. That means the events start at a position of rest and there's complication and difficulties until it gets to a point of real conflict, and then something happens and the conflict is resolved and the thing goes back to a point of rest. The guy who noticed this didn't invent it, but he noticed it, a guy called Gustav Freytag, Freytag. And Freytag designed what he called his pyramid, and you can Google that, it's everywhere in literary analysis. And again, it's a deliberate shaping of the events of the story so that they have this narrative arc to them, so that they do that. Again, to ask, did the events happen in that order and in that way? It really happened that way? We don't know. Why did a writer shape it that way? Because it helps a reader remember and relate to the story. Writers do this. This is evidence of writerly activity. Couple of great examples of this, what's called a narrative arc, or Freytag's pyramid, or however you want to describe it. The plague narrative in Exodus. You notice each plague is a little more serious, a little more damaging, devastating than the one before, so there's an increase in tension and danger and so forth up the line until finally we get to the killing of the firstborn sons, and then there's a little resolution there, but then Pharaoh goes after them, so the thing picks up again and there's a further narrative. Did those plagues happen in that order? Don't know. Did they happen that way? Don't know. We weren't there. But a writer has shaped that story in that way so that a reader can relate to the story and stay with it because it's interesting and exciting and has shape to it. A story has a certain shape to it. Another example of this narrative arc, or the Freytag's pyramid, is the story of Abraham and Isaac. And it's completely consistent with the form that they go up a mountain. As the story increases in tension, they're going up. And at the top, there's a resolution. And then the story resolves back down. Okay? Again, did the events happen in that way? We don't know. Did a writer shape them that way for purposes that we can talk about? Absolutely. Okay, so there's another one. There's hyperbole, which is a deliberate exaggeration for effect. You could probably write a whole paper just exploring that in the material. There's this narrative arc, or Freytag's pyramid, in a number of these stories that you also could explore and probably make a whole paper out of it. While we're talking about Abraham and Isaac, there's another great example of a writer doing what a writer does in that piece, and it's called dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is when the audience, the reader, knows something that a character in the story doesn't know. Well, we know, according to the story, why Abraham is taking Isaac up that mountain, and Isaac keeps asking, why are we going up here? Which allows the reader to relate to the character and be in on the secret, be in on the creative process. And so when the resolution comes, both the reader has a different level of awareness from what one of the characters has had. Dramatic irony is absolutely everywhere, and there are many stories in this material where you can find dramatic irony as evidence of a writer working on the thing. Everything that I'm telling you about is relatively easy to find with a search on EBSCOhost or Google. And I think you could get a good paper out of any one of these three, or if you didn't have enough material, maybe combine a couple of them. Two other things. Another thing that a writer loves to do is to play with words and create puns, P-U-N-S. We think of puns as being sort of stupid, clever plays on words and not much more to it than that. But when a writer makes a pun, a writer is attempting to import meanings from two different types of words or two different connotations of a single word or something like that. And for a writer, a pun can often be a serious way of creating a kind of double meaning. Lots of puns. Itzhak, he laughs. Moses comes out of the water. Those are puns. Those are plays on words. Again, absolute evidence that a writer did this. One of the most interesting ones, which you can't see unless you read the Hebrew, but the descriptors of the serpent at the beginning of the Garden of Eden story, usually translated, I forget how Oxford translates it. I think they say the serpent was the craftiest creature or the cleverest creature. I don't remember the exact translation. But in the Hebrew, which again, you wouldn't notice unless you read the Hebrew, but in the Hebrew there's a play on the words arum and arom, and I don't remember which is which, but one of them means smooth as in not having any hair on your body, like a snake doesn't have any hair on its body. And the other one is smooth as in clever, like a smooth operator or a slick operator. So the writer in the Hebrew puns on the closeness of arum and arom, meaning slick and slick, meaning not having any hair, and meaning clever and slippery and slick. There's a very clever pun on that word, which doesn't usually get translated very well. But to translate the Hebrew accurately, most likely, and catch that pun, and I've never seen this done, but to make an accurate translation and carry the pun over, probably the way to translate it would be to say the serpent was the smoothest operator in the garden, or the slickest operator, or something like that. That captures the sense of both words and combines them in double meaning. Again, absolute evidence that a writer worked on this. Regular people don't do this. This is stuff that writers do, and it's absolute evidence here and every place else you see it that a writer has sat down and worked on this. One other thing, one symbol that is everywhere in mythology and everywhere in this material is what is called the axis mundi, A-X-I-S-M-U-N-D-I, and it means literally the center of the world. But in most mythologies, including this one, at the axis mundi, at the center of the world, there's some kind of a vertical connection. If the worldview of the particular culture is layered, like this one is, heaven, earth, hell, upper earth, middle earth, lower earth, as Tolkien used it, if there's a vertical arrangement, a layered arrangement of the universe, and there is in probably 95% of cultures, where the gods are somehow up here, and people are here, and then there's something below, at least 3 layers. At the axis mundi, there's a vertical connection, and people can go up and down, and the gods can come down and people can go up. In some cultures, it's only the shamans or the holy people or the priests who can do this. In some cultures, everybody can. So there are a half a dozen axes mundi in this material, and you could easily take 1 or 2 or 3 of those and spin them out to a larger comparative paper on the phenomenon in other cultures, because it's absolutely everywhere. Sometimes it's a tree, as in the Garden of Eden. Sometimes it's a mountain, as Mount Sinai. Sometimes it's a totem pole. Sometimes it's Jack and the Beanstalk. Sometimes It's the tower, the pillar of fire and smoke that leads the Israelites around in the desert. Sometimes it's a ladder with angels going up and down. These things are absolutely everywhere, and they're designed to put forward the idea that there is communication vertically between the layers of the model of the universe. Particularly interesting one in this material is the Tower of Babel, Babel, where people are building this tower so they can go and look up into heaven, and the gods sort of quash it down because they don't want people seeing what they're doing up there. And that's the supposed origin of why we have so many languages in the world, is because people were getting too uppity, and the gods smacked them down by mixing up their languages so they couldn't talk to each other. You recognize that Tower of Babel can be connected directly back to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2. You can make lateral connections within the material, or you can take one or two and connect it out to axis mundi in other cultures, if you want to do a comparison thing. So there, and again, that would be a really fascinating paper. It's something I know quite a bit about and something I could help with. So the trick is to get your paper topic picked. Don't sit like the Buddha under the Bodhi tree waiting for inspiration to strike, because it won't. You have to do the work. You have to approach the subject. You have to carve out your topic. And that's what I'm here to help you do. There's some resources on the net, on the class website. There's a little thing on how to pick a paper topic, which really works if you use it. There's a paper planner there where you just plug in your dates and your due dates, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to be doing on any given day. And you can even plug your email account in, and it'll remind you, hey, you should be doing this today. There's also, I sent you by announcement the guidelines for this and the criteria by which it will be judged. So you've got a lot of material to work with. Next week, you're going to be creating this draft and doing the best you can, and we'll be doing some reviewing and stuff so that you'll have your draft ready to go for peer review the following week. We've been going very slowly because I wanted to get everybody on board who was intending to get on board. I wanted to get everybody on board, and there was some background information and some data and some vocabulary and some ways of approaching the material that most people are unfamiliar with, and you needed to learn that stuff and get an idea about it so that your papers will be successful. But we've gone fairly slowly. We are going to have to pick up the pace. We're at week 4 now, I think. So we're a fourth of the way through the class, and we've got spring break coming up soon. So we are going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. I'm going to assume that all the technical stuff, the lingo and the terms and the specific literary approaches, I'm going to assume that you've got that now. So I'm not going to keep on reviewing that stuff. I'm going to assume you've got it. And since you haven't bailed out of the class, I'm going to assume you're willing to try to apply it. Again, I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for a good faith effort to apply the material of the class. That's all I'm looking for. Next week, I think I told you, but I'm going to be traveling out of the country with some friends for starting next Tuesday and for 2 weeks. I don't expect any interruption at all, except I am going to be traveling next Tuesday. I'm going to be in the air most of the day, going to New York and London and then Venice. And I probably will not have a lot of chance to check in with you on Tuesday. So I'm going to try to get the stuff for next week up on Monday, or even maybe over the weekend, so that you'll have it. And then I should be settled in Venice by Tuesday afternoon, and should be able to check in with you just as if I were home the rest of that week. So just wanted to let you know, and I'll remind you again that I may be sort of missing in action on Tuesday, next Tuesday. All right. So please get those papers going. If you need my help, you want my advice, I'm happy to advise. But don't sit on the sidelines and wait for inspiration to strike, and then come the day before the thing is due, and lo and behold, inspiration hasn't struck and you haven't done anything about it. Don't be that person. Be proactive. The sooner you start, the easier it is. And then we'll talk about that a little bit next week. Okay, I'm going to get off of here, get this up for you so you can start thinking seriously about paper topics. I haven't seen anything from... I put up a lecture, about Leviticus. You should listen to that and look through Leviticus if you want to, and pose any questions you want to about Leviticus. But I haven't seen any questions that you've put up about what you'd like to look at in Numbers and Deuteronomy. So it's going on, what is it, about 8 o'clock in California. Yeah. A little after 8 a.m. on Wednesday in California. If I haven't heard anything from you by noon in terms of your interests, I'm just going to pick some passages and put them up in the forum for discussion. Okay, we'll talk at you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.